Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jason Thornton, and you might not recognize the gentleman with me. His name is Tim Rush. It's been a few weeks since he has graced us in our post-sermon conversation, but I'm very glad to have you back. I enjoyed talking with Quincy and the lady, I can't recall her name from last week. She was fascinating. I'll tell you, I'd like to marry that lady.
Heather did a great job.
She did fantastic. So getting to it, you preached this last Sunday. And so for those that haven't got to hear it, give us a brief synopsis of what God gave you to share with us.
Yeah, the title yesterday was Where Do We Go From Here? And it was coming from John chapter 6, where Jesus turns to the disciples and said, "You guys too, are y'all leaving?" And Peter responds, "Where else would we go? We know that you are the one. You are the one." And looking into John 6 and seeing that was, I think I used the word duress, that was coming from a place of difficulty after living out John chapter 6. Did I say John chapter 1 a minute ago?
I don't think so.
I don't know what I'm saying. And so tracking through the difficulty of that chapter and coming to the realization that what Peter was saying was, Jesus, we are at the end of our rope, but you are that rope. And so when we are at the end of our rope, as long as we realize that rope is Jesus, we are in a good place. Versus the Psalm 139, verses 7 through 10 that say, where could I go and you aren't already there? If I were to go up to the heavens, if I were to go to the depths of the sea, if I were to go to the far side of the sea, you would still be there. And carrying both of those ideas of where could we go? Where would we want to go? And Christ is there. I feel like the majority of the sermon revolved around that being at the end of our rope, just making sure that rope was Jesus.
Excellent. So talk to me about, we haven't talked in this way for a minute, but I don't know, I'm drawn here. We are not in a theme right now. So we've been doing lion versus lion. And there are times when we're in a theme, I feel a little constricted because we are very intentional about saying, man, we really want to make sure the church hears this message. And especially with lion versus lion, so many of our message built on each other, So if something hits me in February that I'm like, man, we need 3 weeks on this, I can't just do that. You know what I mean? On the other hand, being part of the theme is very centering, and you really start to think in a vein, like you see it everywhere, like lion versus lion was everywhere for me. And, and before that, the incomparable Jesus was everywhere for me. And before that, it just keeps going on and on. And so, but now we're in kind of unspecified time, and so even me, my sermon time, I used it to interview Heather on Mother's Day. So I had a theme, but you didn't have a theme, you weren't given any direction. And so how did it feel? How did you come up with the thought? How did God lead you to those scriptures?
Well, I'll tell you, without a theme, when I'm living without a theme, that's harder for me. I think if it were just me, I would probably not have themes. But whenever we do have themes, man, I really like that. Because I realize when I don't have a theme, I stress over it. Am I supposed to talk about this? Am I supposed to talk about this? Am I supposed to talk about this? And not having preached for 2 weeks, it felt like that John 6, Peter's response to Jesus, that just was resonating with me for some reason. And so even before I sat down and started looking at the entire context of John 6 and was just thinking, what did I know of John 6 and what do I think that's talking about? I kept coming back to that. And eventually at some point, I think just I don't know why I started reading Psalm 139 and realizing, oh my goodness, this is the same words, but such a different feel to it. So I had longer to sit with it and to think about it. And so it evolved more and more. And then you and I talked a couple of weeks ago about a week ago about the May 30th
Mm.
theme. And it felt like talking about the May 30th theme, it felt like this message rose to the top for me. Like what we were sharing about that idea made Peter's words make even more sense to me.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it seemed like it was just cooking for a while. And so then whenever I sat down to look at the John 6 flow, and because I had a good idea of what the context was, but reading it out and looking at it, um, it felt like there were a lot of things that were very pertinent for our culture and our church today. And it also felt like there were a lot of things in there that were just for me. Like
Mhm.
this is just God saying, hey, Tim, I want you to know this is where I'm at with you right now. And that was a weird um, realization of, I don't think this is for the sermon. I think this is God saying, this is important for you right now. So
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. That is an interesting thing. And I think we could spend a lot of time talking about why do you go the direction you go. And the truth is, even if we had the same topic, if you and I had the same verse, the same theme, we would preach two very different sermons. And if you preached it today and preached it 6 months from now, you would preach two very different sermons. So it's just really fascinating. Now, I think a lot of people maybe don't do this. They manuscript it. Terry would talk about how when he was graduating from, oh, what was it?
Preston Road.
Preston Road, how they would say you need a box full of your sermons and you need to just keep coming back to those. And kind of the sense would be, this is the truth. Keep presenting this truth just like this for the rest of your life, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas where he ended up, and certainly how you and I work, is we believe that God wants to speak through us, stuff he's teaching us, you know, this week, stuff he taught us 10 years ago, stuff he's teaching us in the moment while we're speaking, that this is a very fluid dynamic, and that we don't, I don't value stuff God is teaching me right this second more than stuff he taught me 30 years ago. But I also don't invalidate what he's teaching me right this second because I understood something different 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, and having that balance, it's all potentially from the Holy Spirit. Am I willing to listen no matter when he gave it to me?
Yeah. Let me show you this if I can get my screen share to work right. Is that working? Can you see that?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So if I were to have preached on Tuesday, this would have been a big part of my sermon.
Uh-huh.
And it came from our conversations. It came from um, sitting with Peter saying, where else could I go? And it came, I mean, it's a big mixing pot, including the conversation we had at our new members dinner
Mm-hmm.
when we were talking about this is discipleship. And this is how Memorial is approaching discipleship right now. And I was thinking about how soul work, spiritual formation, and mission are not unique. Not just they aren't unique to Memorial Drive, they aren't unique to Christianity. Like you can find pieces of each one of these things in the secular world. You can find people living on mission. Even what we would say is godly mission, people do things that are really good without God. Like they just have a heart for blessing the poor.
Right.
Um, Spiritual formation, a lot of there are a lot of spiritual practices that people do a form of that is godless. And I don't
Right.
mean like it's evil. I mean it there is God not in it.
Mhm.
And the same thing for soul work. There are all sorts of modes to dig in deep and take and examine what's really going on that are minus Jesus. And each of those things are empty when you take Christ out of it.
Right.
They may provide a step towards healing, or they may provide help for other people. But when you take Christ out of the picture, man, it really is empty in the end. And so that if I were to have preached on Tuesday, this would have been what the bigger part of the sermon was about.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel bad because Shane just does an incredible job, and he put these together pretty quickly and easily, and we never got to him on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's interesting to me. That's just very interesting. And I think, it's like I've had so many ideas of how to do ministry over the year and was really excited about it. And then a month later, I couldn't even remember it. You know what I mean? And just really even entrusting God with that, and trusting God that God leads me. He leads me to the messages I need. And the truth is, if for some reason, Sunday was postponed, you would have preached it different on Wednesday, and that's really interesting to me. I'll tell you, for the Facebook Lives, like, I will often have a strong sense of what I'm going to do, and go to sleep on Wednesday night, and Thursday morning I wake up with a totally different idea. And like this last Thursday morning, I woke up, and I haven't thought about this for a long time, but the song, if you're happy and it, clap your hands. And I'm like, it's kind of telling that we don't have a song called "If You're Sad and it, clap your hands," or "Cry Together," even though Jesus said we're to mourn together, or the Bible says we're supposed to mourn together. Or if you're overwhelmed and it, clap your hands, or this kind of thing. And that actually ended up tying back into what I was thinking the previous day and the previous few days. But it took on a totally different face because of it. And I just think that's part of it. Luke 12:12, when Jesus is talking to the apostles, he said, this trouble is going to come. And he says, but don't worry about what you're going to say, because the Holy Spirit will teach you at that time. Now they're in front of kings and rulers, in Jesus telling, that's when this prediction is going to happen. But it is that I think that dynamic is still true. I don't think Peter had the sermon on Pentecost written down. And the reason I think that's good standing, I can make that assertion factually, is because he didn't know Pentecost. To him, Pentecost was this Jewish festival. It wasn't the time when 3,000 people were baptized. You know what I mean? So he didn't have a sermon in his back pocket. And I don't think he had a sermon in his back pocket anytime, and Paul comes along with the same thing. Paul wasn't like, okay, here's my sermon for the people in Athens, and here's my sermon for the people in Ephesus. He was just letting God teach him, and then he shared the overflow.
Man, I remember in Guadalajara, like I remember a specific Sunday morning where with our house church in a very poor neighborhood in Guadalajara, and something was going on that was really heavy and scary. And we're sitting there talking, and I thought of that passage that God would give me something to say. And I'm sitting there thinking, what is it, God? What is it? And I'm dying to speak. Like, somebody obviously needs to say something, because this is, I mean, I don't know how to, without saying what the situation was, but it was dicey and it was dangerous. And I don't mean dangerous like spiritually. I mean, could turn dangerous physically. And we're sitting there. I'm like, God, you've got to give me something to say. And I had this really weird peace come over me that said, if God doesn't give me something to say, I don't need to say it, because I had the sense of, I have to say something. And I was on the verge of speaking without God having given me anything. And so I just sat there quietly. And the guy in our group, who was not even a Christian yet, spoke to the man who was really troubled. And I think the words that he spoke to the man who was really troubled were a large piece of his conversion story. Like, he may not remember that at all, but he was offering consoling wisdom. And I think he received the consoling wisdom. I think God gave that man something to say that was so beautiful and important that would have been missed had I spoken without God having given me something. So I say all that to say, I think God keeps that promise. And sometimes sometimes the word he gives us is shut up right now.
Mhm.
Be quiet. Um, but it's still a hard thing to do.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And our cultural expectations, you were the missionary, so that just builds, you were the man in the room, that builds, and so all these expectations we have. Let's turn toward the actual content of your sermon. I thought it was an excellent sermon. I thought it framed where we are at right now, both as a church and as a culture, and maybe especially in Tulsa. For those that are listening that don't know, the Tulsa Race Massacre, the 100-year centennial, it's coming up May 31st. And so there's going to be a spotlight on Tulsa, and obviously we're Tulsans. And so we're invested in our community. But as with any event like this, there are people coming in with tremendous love and attention and desires for healing and reconciliation. I was with the governor and his wife and one of the pastors from Vernon AME Church, and the man that's going to be the president of the Greenwood Rising Museum. And they're talking just about how God has been involved in all of this. And there's a prayer coalition among 40, 50, 60 churches in Tulsa. And that's not all the beautiful things that are going to happen, but that was just one manifestation. And yet we also know the devil wants to use every single thing coming in our lives. Yes, it can be destructive, but mostly he just wants it to cause us to not trust God, ultimately, And so the more we are disillusioned and the more we feel disconnected from hope, the better it is for the devil to either, eliminate us or at least minimize our influence. Because I get so consumed over things that make me angry or sad or scared. And so I stop trusting in God and I lose that opportunity, to be there. So to say you're not alone, if you feel that way, here are the apostles. And I thought it was well done, your homiletics, the way you put the lesson together. You presented the concept, and then you went back and you presented, this dynamic of the ultimate, or not the alternative, the opposite feelings. I'd love to get away from God, but where would I go anyway? Whereas Peter, who could get away from God, and I think he's speaking for the 12 there, but they're choosing to stay, and you contrast that well. And then you led through, let's look briefly at this sermon, like what has led to this statement. And I don't think we can overestimate the sense of disappointment and sadness. If you were that guy that were evaluating Jesus' ministry, you referred to him as the PR guy. If Jesus had a PR guy, revisit that a little bit since you didn't talk about the summary. Talk to us about what the PR guy, what we can imagine he would have said to Jesus during the preaching of that it is recorded in John 6.
Yeah. So Jesus feeds the 5,000 and they want to come make him king. And so he runs and hides, which I think that's fascinating that Jesus hid. There are a couple of things with language that this isn't your question, but when it said he saw the 5,000 and he asked his disciples, what should we do? And it says, Jesus said this to test them. And I feel like we have a aversion to that word right now for some reason. Like it seems like culturally, oh, don't you test. You're a jerk if you're testing people. But when we look, I don't know why that is, but it seems like if we look at it from the standpoint of Jesus mentoring and looking at his men who he knows he will leave and says, guys, what would you do here? Not testy, but
Right.
putting it out on the table. This is training. This is real life training, which makes me wonder when Andrew says, hey, we've got this kid with 5 loaves and 2 fish. I wonder if Jesus thought, didn't see that coming. All right, well, this is what we'll do.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if he had a completely different plan, but he goes with what Andrew
Fascinating.
suggests. Yeah. But he runs away from the crowd. He walks on water. The crowd eventually catches up to him, and he says, "You're just here because I fed you." So, Jesus, you've got a lot of people following you. and you're barking at them for why they are there. Don't you want to just walk alongside them and encourage them on why they should? And they bring up Moses and the manna, and Jesus says, yeah, uh, I'm the bread of life. And they get upset because he says he came down from heaven. And Jesus says, yeah, I came down from heaven. And Jesus, we just established that's why they're bugged. Why don't you clean that up?
Mhm.
And instead of cleaning it up, he doubles down. Eat my flesh. It's like somebody's got to step in and say, Jesus, they don't understand. Don't you want to help them understand? Hey, you know what? Drink my blood. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you're killing me.
It's like a train wreck. You can't look away. It's like, oh, it's just awful.
Yeah. And so then at the end, I don't know. I made this point yesterday. I think I mentioned this at the beginning of this conversation, that it looks like Peter is responding, we are at the end of our rope, but you're the rope. Where else would we go? Um, and so I wonder, so as I'm walking through that, it just made me wonder, is Jesus, we don't want to be at the end of our rope, but is that a healthy place that Jesus looks at and goes, hey, if you get there and you realize I am the rope, you're in a good spot.
Mhm.
But my goodness, I don't
Yeah.
want to be there.
Well, it speaks a lot to success. I try to put myself in the from the mindset of the apostles, specifically Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, where he says, hey, I'm going to make you fishers of men. And it's fascinating to me. He says, like, if you'd never read the Bible before and you get there and you're in where Mark 4, Luke 5, you know, that area. But when you get there and he says, I'm going to make you fishers of men, and then he never references it again. Like, he is the worst branding person ever. Like, it's so funny. I remember when I realized, because fishers of men, are you a fisherman? I felt like I grew up with that all the time. He says it one time and never refers to it again. Even when they're fishing again, he doesn't say, remember you're fishers of men. Like, he never referenced it. The other thing that's fascinating to me, well, let me finish that thought. So here they are thinking we're going to be fishers of men. And again, they are so slow to learn. I don't even know if they're able to connect the dots, but let's assume they're like, okay, fish, we just caught all these fish, exceeded our expectations. So we're going to catch a lot of men. We're going to exceed our expectation. No more would you feel that way than you're faced with 5,000 men and who knows how many women and children. So you're looking at this huge area filled with, I don't know, 7, 8, 9,000 people, you know, and you're looking out over this huge group, and Jesus is he feeds them, and you're like, oh, we are winning. I mean, they're probably going to be 7,000 tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they find him, and he's critical of people. It's not just saying, look, guys, this is not the culture I want to build. He's just like, he won't even hear it. You know what I mean? Like they're wrong to ask. And it's because they missed the point.
Yeah.
You know, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just amazing that he's okay with it.
Mhm.
That because it's not like I'm looking at this realizing something Jesus didn't know. Like that, I hope people got the wink wink nudge nudge part of that if I were his PR guy. But it is so strong, it feels that way.
Mhm.
Jesus, don't you know they don't understand? Because we would go out of our way to make sure that we were communicating this better. And that wasn't his, it wasn't his concern to apologize for people being upset by what he said.
This is why it's really challenging to actually look at the Gospels and Acts as well, and think, how would I base my ministry on this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the opposite of what we're taught. I mean, if 5,000 people showed up at our church and we gave them all pizza, and the next day they showed up like, we want to be with you again and preach another message, and I knew they also wanted more pizza, I wouldn't chastise them for wanting the very thing I gave them 24 hours before. You know, now, if he'd fed the 5,000 and said, hey guys, that's it. There will be no more. But he gave them so much bread, they collected extra baskets,
Yeah.
you know? And this is the thing is, we would be critical of Jesus because we would say he built the expectation.
Yeah.
Now they're simply asking him to do it again. And it goes all the way to, I'll give you some bread.
Yeah. This makes me feel so tender for all of our missionaries. When we were in Guadalajara, we had a fluctuation, and we went from us arriving in Guadalajara to a church of 85, but missionaries were going home, which meant American dollars were leaving and American leadership was leaving. 85 to 35 in 1 year. And so we decided we've got to do this differently. So we did house churches, so it didn't need money and it didn't need professional leadership. And so 85 to 35 to 120. But the 120 were not in one place. They were all around Guadalajara. We had the hardest time communicating that with one of our supporters for some reason. I felt like most understood, but this one church kept calling us and saying, hey, since it's not working, should you guys go back to a traditional model of church? And so I'd have to say 85, 35, 120. Oh, okay. Okay, I see it. 6 months later, we'd have the exact same conversation. And my point is this: we were growing, but because they weren't following it very well, they ended up dropping our support. What if we actually continued to shrink and had gone down to 12? Like that, Jesus's ministry went to the thousands and then back to the 12.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't have made it in our world today, but it was exactly what needed to happen. And it was exactly where he needed it to go. But it doesn't make sense to us.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And I think that's a really good way of framing it. Jesus would not have kept support from the vast majority of churches by the way he did stuff. Can you imagine if you hear from a missionary and you're like, tell me what's been going on? They're like, man, I had this tremendous conversation with this person, met him on, wherever, a bus, and we talked and we studied for hours and it changed his life. And I told him, I said, you don't tell anybody about this conversation. We'd be like, what? Like, do you even understand basic Christianity? Like, you are not a missionary. You just told the guy that would be the most encouraging, your best advocate, to not tell anybody. Jesus did that. You know what I mean? And he's like, you don't have that kind of momentum to all these seekers and then say, not only are we done, but I'm saying I'm going to give you something so repulsive that if you stay, you will be disgusting to people. And I want to throw out there, historically, after the New Testament writers conclude, there are stories about Christians being accused of cannibalism, largely based on this concept. Like, so basically this reputation stayed with them for a long time, so this wasn't without consequence. And can you imagine if you're a Christian and you're going to talk to your cousin about Jesus and he's like, the cannibal? No, he meant that spiritually. He's like, well, he didn't say that. And I've got, 100 eyewitnesses that says he didn't say that. So you guys must be cannibals. I mean, so this was really an impediment to the gospel, at least it could be. And yet Jesus said that. I don't know. I find this whole interaction so anti what people are taught to reach out to people with. It's just so anti what the, orthodoxy would present.
I'll tell you, this is the first time I've ever prayed this before preaching. But I found myself praying, God, please protect the people from me and my opinions and my views, because it felt, it felt really strong of him saying, like, in my mind, I see the words, drink, period, my, period, blood, period. Like it just felt, it felt very over the top, my way or the highway. don't get in my way, because I'm not slowing down to make this nice for you. I'm not going to apologize. I'm not slowing down for you. Um, and I really felt like it's funny. I feel so much more passionate than whenever I watch the replay and see. So I go, well, that wasn't near as passionate as I felt. But it was the first time I've ever thought, man, God, I don't, I want you to protect the listeners from me. If this isn't your spirit, if this is me running off with something that you don't intend for me to run off with, protect them from me. But it just felt really convicting to me. Eat, period, my period, flesh, period.
Yeah. Yeah. And how can it not? But I really appreciate you sharing that, because even when we're quoting Jesus, honestly, maybe especially when we're quoting Jesus, we're like, what right do I have to say this? I'm just a man,
Yeah.
you know? And obviously we're not suggesting, we're saying eat my personal flesh. We're just repeating that this is what Jesus said. And he said it for a purpose. And clearly he wasn't a cannibal and wasn't encouraging cannibalism. I do wonder, I've wondered for a long time, at the next meal, so it's the apostles and Jesus, and there's not enough food. And they're like, oh, you got to get some more food. I do not even want to deal with this, because he doesn't clean it up. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Hey, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, you had this tremendous parallel about these people seeking a king and Jesus refusing it. And the sense is, I was actually behind the stage in the baptistry, so I could hear a lot of it, but I want to make sure I got this right. The sense was, look, we all do this. We want a king, and I would add to it, and we always want to create a Jesus in our own image. So if I feel like Jesus was an activist, all of a sudden Jesus, all I see is political activism. If I feel like Jesus was a revolutionary, all I see is revolution. If he's anti-church, if he's pro-church, he's that, whatever it is I see, I can make Jesus, and this is one of those examples of them making Jesus in their image. They took these facets of Jesus and then created this composite that was going to be their king and lead them against Rome. And that's why he hid himself. But we can do the same thing unintentionally. And you were talking about how, if you are one, and you may need to clean up what I say, but this is the sense I have. If you are one that wears a Make America Great hat, or if you're one that wears a Black Lives Matter, t-shirt, and we could add to this, if you're one that says, I've heard people say, man, if God does anything to my family, I won't believe in him anymore.
Yeah.
Well, basically you just said, if you're wearing that hat, be careful, because the Make America Great hat, then what you're saying is, this is the main important thing. This is the king, or Black Lives Matter is the king, or my family's the king, or whatever else is the king. And the strength of it was, you need to make sure that whoever it is you're following, and you're saying whichever rope you're hanging on to, you're using that as a parallel, who's your king and what's the rope you're hanging on. You need to make sure that king is willing to die to himself, die for the sake of others. And he calls you to do that. So did I get that close? What would you do?
Yeah, I think where I went with it was, if you're wearing that hat and you're calling it, this is Jesus's lead.
There you go.
This Jesus is leading this movement.
Mm-hmm.
If Jesus were here, this is where Jesus would be. If you are doing that and you aren't constantly preaching that you and your followers, and if the leader of your movement is not preaching that they and their followers should be up on their cross dying for the people that oppose them, you can't call it a Jesus movement. You can't say this is what Jesus would be doing if the leaders aren't modeling being crucified for the opposition.
Right.
When you put on that hat, you aren't modeling being crucified for the opposition. You have your right to your ideology and your political beliefs, but you don't have a right to say they're Jesus's, because it's, and the weird thing is, everybody who doesn't wear your hat sees it. And I don't just mean the ones who wear the opposing hat. Anybody who's not wearing your hat can look at that and go, "Hmm, that something," even if they can't put their finger on it, they know that's not a
Mhm.
Christ-led movement. Um, it's obvious to everybody else, but for some reason, it's our passion, um, to make Christ. We want to recreate Christ in our image, just like you said, and make him the head of this movement, and it's just not there.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's just a when you said that that connection was really powerful for me. And I see that in a lot of things. It's similar to the dynamic of you can only have one master.
Mhm.
That Jesus saying, he's not saying it to be mean, he's saying it to say you're only going to have the resources of the master you choose, the master you serve,
Yeah.
you know. And I think that's what it is. We get ourselves involved in human thinking and human movements, human causes, and we disconnect from the most important aspect of who Jesus was, the chief sacrificer of all time,
Yeah.
you know. And that's what we're called to. He says, man, when you're given authority, you do not use it like the pagans do. You make yourself a slave to all. And I don't think it's just being raised in America, but that's what I can speak to is we preach almost the exact opposite message. When you have power, you better use it to keep your power. You become a servant to all. Give me a break. I mean, that is ridiculous. And that should look so different in the church. And when it doesn't look different, man, that gives the devil a lot of room to work.
Yeah. Man, you mentioning the one that says if God ever allowed anything bad to happen to my family, um, it makes me think I've heard that. I've been in the room where people have said that, and I've gone, "Hmm," and that's it. And
Mm-hmm,
I think, what would Jesus do in that moment? I mean,
mm-hmm,
I think I feel certain Jesus would call them out in an eat my flesh type of way.
mm-hmm,
But I always feel like, oh, um, wait, patience, and there is a place in following Jesus for waiting and being patient
mm-hmm.
and giving people time for growth. But that disregards the words where Jesus says hot or cold, but
Mm-hmm.
lukewarm, I'm spitting you out of my mouth. And so
Yeah.
we have to, man, we can't cherry pick which one of these values do we want to hold. We have to learn how to live them out together,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
that is so
yeah,
hard.
it is. And that's the thing is, if we're a community of people that says, you know, being being a United States citizen isn't the Jesus party, or being a Republican or Democrat aren't the Jesus party. We have great privileges in this country, and whatever political choice you make that choice. But we are connected by something deeper and stronger, eternal. I hope nobody thinks the United States of America is eternal. I mean, that's unbiblical. um, and that idea of yeah, just being able to distinguish who is really my king here. Who is it that I continue to worship? And honestly, when I get angry with people, the vast majority of time, literally 95% of the time, if I step back, I realize I've made something a king other than Jesus here. My opinions are king. My point of view is king. My desires are king. My self-awareness is king. But when I step back and say, wait a minute, I'm called to be Christ in this situation and sacrifice, it doesn't make sacrifice easy, but man, it becomes super crystal clear. Once I frame it in the right way and put it in the right perspective, I'm like, oh yeah, I know what I'm supposed to do here. I may not know how to do it, but I know what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, yeah. I think of in Mexico, dealing with a specific young lady, and Kim and confronting the same situation at different times, and in the moment asking God, what am I supposed to do right now? What am I supposed to do? And the verse that came to her mind was, don't quench the spirit. And so she decided, okay, um patience, come alongside her in a very peaceful way, focusing on not quenching her spirit, that she was making an error, but it was a hustle error. Then the exact same thing happened 6 months to 2 years later. And Kim was sitting there going, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And she heard, you will know them by their fruits. And the fruit that she was bearing in front of a lot of people was bitterness and anger in the form of righteous pride. That may not make sense, but when that first verse came to her of you'll know them by their fruits, it set her on a different course of not just correcting her, but in front of the people that she was influencing in that moment. Same girl, largely the same situation, but when she stopped and asked God, what in the world should I do? God led her to two distinct, different actions, both through his word. And oddly, like when Kim tells this story, the words he used were New American Standard Version, because that's the Bible she grew up with. She's used an NIV for the last 20 years, but she grew up with NAS. And so that's how God spoke to her. And so that, I don't know why, but that piece is fascinating to me. But I think that God will do that for us whenever we're asking God, am I supposed to be patient right now? Or am I supposed to, is this a eat my flesh type of moment?
Yeah.
And I think God will provide, just like you were saying earlier, he will provide those words when we need them. Man, and this totally explains why we would rather precedent and we would rather a rule book that we knew in this situation, this is always the answer. But God doesn't work that way.
That's right. Well, and there's such an operative dynamic of the give and take between God and us, where he says, ask and you will receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened. But I think sometimes we get the sense that mature people stop asking because they just know what to do. And there's not an expiration date on that. When are you supposed to ask? The first day you meet God and the last breath in your body. You're always asking God, what about this? I don't care if I've done it 5 million times and it's always gone this way. What do you want now? Because that keeps us teachable, it keeps us humble, and honestly, more importantly, it keeps us open to the new thing God is doing, because he says, I make all things new. But we say, yeah, you make all things new. Can we keep doing the old thing we've done for 1,000 years? Because that's what we really want. And we just created our own Jesus, a version that's not really Jesus at all, because our Jesus doesn't change,
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, Jesus says, in order for me to make things new, that means I keep changing these things.
I'm laughing because I'm seeing the face of the guy that said, I know this is what Memorial's going to do, and I know it's just fine. There's nothing wrong with it biblically, but I'm asking, would you wait until I'm dead to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's horribly awkward. Would you stunt the growth of the church because I'm uncomfortable? Would you wait till I'm dead to do it?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm laughing also because I know that's me. I have my own hangups. I have my own blind spots. And to me, they don't feel like blind spots. They feel like, well, this is right. And we all know it.
Right.
And so my dad, I love his constant challenge of he's very appreciative for you and for me. And each time that he's grateful for where we're leading, he says, and pay attention to your kids because they are going to come home with some ideas that you may not be on board with, and you need to listen. And so I think, oh my goodness, that's
right.
a frightening thought.
It is. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the lesson. Thank you for your time. It really blesses me. It challenges me. It gives me new words, both to think and to say. And so, yeah, really, really grateful.
Well, thank you. I honestly, last week, I actually thought about calling you and saying, hey, instead of a post-sermon conversation, what if we do a pre-sermon conversation? Because I think it would be excellent to say, hey, Jason, this is what I think I'm going to talk about, and have a 50-minute conversation about what the 20-minute sermon will be. But I felt like once we're done, I won't be able to squeeze that back into 20 minutes. So
Right.
I opted not to,
Yeah.
but I love walking through these things with you is what I'm saying.
Me too. Hey, want to let everybody know who's listening. We are going to take a break in June and July from doing this. I mean, maybe a longer break, but certainly June and July. And so we will have a post-sermon conversation over the next 2 coming Sundays. And then we'll take that break. And in the meantime, so in June and July, we want you to take a break and breathe and, do whatever else you would do with this time, but any feedback you'd have for us about, hey, when you focus on this, it's really helpful, or, something that you've never talked about would be this, that would be interesting to me, or, honestly, even an honest, you know what, it's really interesting, but you waste most of my time. And it's like, I don't want to hear that, but if it's the truth, I need to hear it. So anyways, any feedback, especially if you listen pretty regularly, would be useful to us to make a good decision about what is it we add to Memorial in this way come, August, September, October in the fall. So just be aware of that. We'll try to announce this the next 2 times we do this, but just so you know in advance.
All right.
All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.